President Donald Trump is sharply focused on ending the war in Ukraine. One of his driving motivations, as he says repeatedly, is to stop the killing of the Russian soldiers, stop the killing of the Ukrainian soldiers, stopping the destruction of land. He seems very sharply focused on what he wants. On his political opponents, however, the Democratic side seems to have some different objectives, and they seem to be working against him at every step. And if it's just a politic issue, if it's just policy, you can kind of understand that. That's just how politics work. But when you're talking about the lives of others, there seems to be something wrong with the system here. And to try to break this down, we have a first-time guest on today. Somebody we're really happy to have is Curt Mills, who is the executive director of the American Conservative magazine right here in Washington, D.C., and, of course, the ever-popular Gary Villapiano. Folks, welcome to the show there. And Curt, really grateful to have you on here.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Listen, of course, I've been reading your stuff at the American Conservative, but years before that. You've been a long time in D.C. I wonder if you could just kind of, for the folks who may not know you, just kind of give a brief, list, I guess, of your experience and things that you've done here in town.
Sure. Yeah. I have been a longtime sort of foreign policy and campaign reporter. I've worked at a number of publications, the Examiner, U.S. News and World Report, National Interest, where I think my stuff had sort of a cult following in the first Trump administration, helped launch the Spectator's U.S. page, and have contributed around Politico, New York Times, et cetera, et cetera. And yeah, I mean, we've done a little of this and a little of that, but nothing quite like covering this new administration. I think we're all taking it in by the fire hose.
Yeah, I think so is the world.
And yeah, you're not the only one.
Yeah. And, I got to say that, especially in contrast to the first month or so of the Trump administration the first time, obviously there wasn't a raging war going on, so that's going to be an external difference. But the way he's handled himself here, he seems a lot more self-confident from day one on some of the things that he's doing. How do you see that?
Yeah, I mean, and just in terms of whatever you think of the policy, just in terms of the pacing, the competency, how ambitious this administration is. This was the outer limits, I think, of what people had in their forecasts. I think a lot of people thought it would be sort of a redux of Trump 1. They might do a tax cut, he'll fire a bunch of people, there'll be a lot of noise, but maybe not, this sort of like seismic, almost like Republican FDR kind of feel to it. That's not what's happening. This is a president who in many ways, and I'm sure he'll never say it, seems to have benefited from the non-continuous terms. I mean, one can imagine the counter history where he was, re-inaugurated in 2021, and the country was still dealing with COVID, and he had sort of limped to the finish line there. This is a rested, more mature, far more aggressive individual, and seasoned politician than the one that came into office in 2017. And I'm not sure anybody around him, or even he's really denying that.
Wow, that's like a political tsunami.
Yeah, that's actually fascinating. I never even stopped to consider that the benefit of 4 years of reflection and then now in preparation, because by all accounts, and yeah, I know you covered this his first term, by all accounts, he didn't actually expect to win in 2016, so he was totally flat-footed. Whereas this time, I think he had a much higher expectation to win. How do you see that?
I mean, I think we hear mixed reports on it. I mean, we don't know, the inner workings of another person's mind, but I think the preponderance of the evidence was that he was quite skeptical that he was actually going to win. I think gun to his head, perhaps he might have answered in the negative. They did win, and I think from that point on, the idea that Donald Trump could win a national election was no longer fan fiction. It was no longer speculation. It was reality, and the reality is now that Trump is the only Republican who has been competitive on a national ballot in some time, right? I mean, 16, 20, and 24 were all more impressive Republican performances than Mitt Romney in 12 or McCain in 08. And additionally, I mean, again, the simulation's only been run a few times, but Republicans have gotten absolutely smoked when Trump isn't on the ballot in 18 and 22. So there's something about the coalition that he's putting together with his name thus far, or his policies thus far, or his brand, whatever you want to call it, that is bringing people to the voting booths in a way that has shocked, I would say, the establishment. Nothing new about this, and raises real question of what this party will be into the near future.
I think it's his skepticism of Washington D.C. In his first term was pretty high. You know, he knew he was dealing with what he kept. You know, the system's rigged. It's a swamp. I'm going to drain it. But boy, there's nothing compared to what he's doing now. How much more savvy he is, and the way he's going about things, and his resistance to all the powers that be against him. And I think the way he's handling it is much more just shrewd.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, just additionally, like there were tailwinds for a presidency this strong, even independent of Trump. I mean, Congress is just increasingly becoming a sad branch of government, even though it's the first branch of government. I mean, it's just, there's just not a ton going on. That might change in 2 weeks. We have another government shutdown, but even that is evidence of Congress's fecklessness. It's only in the news when it literally stops working for a second. So like, yeah, I mean, power has increasingly been concentrated in the executive since at least Nixon. And you know, Trump is taking that up to high voltage. And it's not exactly like, I mean, Trump's many things, but I don't think he's a Madisonian Democrat. I don't think he's too concerned about presidential power. He's happy to accumulate it.
Certainly a lot of evidence to that account, although it's kind of been building up really over multiple presidencies going back. So before we get into the details of you know, what the Democratic Party is doing related to Trump's actions specifically on the Russia-Ukraine war, I guess give me your viewpoint of, it's normal, if not even healthy, when you have a two-party system, that of course it's always going to be the case that the party out of power is going to complain about the party that's in power and they could do a better job, et cetera. But how have you seen that dynamic shift, or have you even seen it shift, say from the first Trump, just on the general political differences between the Republicans and Democrats?
Sorry, can we rephrase that a little bit more?
Yeah. So how much have you seen change just what has historically been the normal opposition party, the party that's out of power, complaining about the previous one, to maybe being more aggressive and confrontational now?
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, I'm sure we'll get into it at length on the foreign policy stuff alone. I mean, it's astonishing as somebody whose sort of formative years were the Iraq War in the 2000s, to see a Democratic Party that is just openly rooting against peace, and that is obsessive about Russia, as any Reagan Republican was in the 80s. That's just a complete inversion. In terms of opposition to Trump, I would say, like, what's been notable, and this is not an original observation, is how much relatively more muted it was compared to 17 to 21. I mean, that was the sort of popular front, no holds barred, even in the COVID era, the 2020 period, it's just quasi suspension of norms and rules and laws. And that's not even getting into the sort of election thing, which is highly disputed and I'm not as interested in. But I mean, anyone who lived through the summer of 2020 was in an American city knows that these were essentially shock troops to eject an elected president of the United States. We're not seeing anything of that, in that direction so far. I hope it holds. It's not healthy for America for that kind of thing to be normalized. And I think the Democrats have. I'm not sure there was a secret meeting where this was hashed out. The Democrats have concluded this crap didn't work. Trump only got stronger after 10 years of screaming bloody murder about this guy. He got more votes than ever in 24, and so I think they have to adopt a new strategy, and they just don't know what it is.
Well, it seems like that they're going to pick as their first opportunity the foreign policy issue here, because obviously, just to set the stage, you had all 4 years of the Biden administration, but certainly the last 3, while there was actually active war going on, to just say we're against Russia bad, Ukraine good, Vladimir Putin's evil, so everything we can do to weaken Russia is good to go, and then we'll just give blanket support for as long as it takes, of course, was the mantra in here. Trump comes in nearly the opposite of that, and now he's talking actual end of the war and peace. And then the immediate response from those on the Democratic side are exemplified, and we're going to show you a number, but here is Susan Rice first talking about what happened in the Oval Office last Friday.
I think there's no question that this was a setup. It was a play to his base, but above all, it was a play to Vladimir Putin.
So there's, you're going to see a new theme, and we'll see this in a little bit. This is that Trump is a stooge of Putin, etc. And even in this specific one here, we did a whole show on breaking down exactly what happened in that Oval Office explosion. It is definitely not the administration that prompted that. In fact, they didn't even want it. But yet that doesn't seem to matter. So you have the Democrats just basically saying everything Trump did is bad. Is that is there some strategy behind that, or do you think it's just a bunch of individuals?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a tricky thing for them because on the one hand, like the Democrats have had this temptation, I think, really since maybe the Obama era, to triple down on their associations with the foreign policy establishment and the military-industrial complex. So in the 90s, and this is something that I'm far less of an expert of, but I think the evidence is pretty clear that the Clinton Democrats made a deal with corporate America, and then under the Obama administration, they increasingly, as they just came to be a byword for American power, the Democratic Party, built alliances within the deep state, the intelligence agencies, whatever you want to call it. And the sort of crescendo of this, I think, was the Kamala Harris candidacy for president when they unironically campaigned with Liz Cheney to try to get votes in Wisconsin. That didn't really work. But I think if Harris had won, I don't think it's exactly a fevered speculation to say that Liz Cheney could have been National Security Advisor or Secretary of Defense. So what you're seeing here now in the contingency where Trump won is a quadrupling down on this relationship, and I think it makes sense in terms of just flooding the zone, to use this Bannon term, against Trump. Say things are bad, things are bad, things are bad, things are bad. Never mind the details. But in terms of electoral politics, it's just not clear to me in the slightest that there is a major constituency out there, to oppose the president's foreign policy, at least in this respect. I think this was sort of commented by the sort of CNN person, Harry Enton, yesterday, the extreme inversions on foreign policy that occurred even in the last 12 months. We talk about, decades and decades and decades. But Biden was underwater by over 20 points this time last year. Trump's still +2 on the Russia-Ukraine issue. The number of Americans who see Russia as an overt enemy of the United States is way down. The number of people that are willing to give the administration a chance on this is way up. So I think this is very good for the Democrats circling the wagons, for them getting ratings maybe on MSNBC. It's just not clear this is going to stop Trump, and it's not clear this is going to win the elections.
Yeah, I think it's boneheaded, actually. Hey, Danny, can I call audible here about what I showed you earlier that I'd like to show Curt? Talk about the flooding the zone, Curt.
Yeah, I was thinking that same thing.
Okay, yeah, good. Talk about flooding the zone and the coordinated effort of the Democrats, which what I'm about to show. I think it's hilariously sad. What we have here is a script that was given to who knows how many Democrats. I think you'll recognize many of them. Now, you can't really go by what you're going to hear because it's a lot of cacophony. But what they are doing, we've got about 20 different Democrats reading from the same script. So let me play it for you, and then we'll talk about it a little bit here.
Is down starting on day one.
So if I can just stop it here, I think you'll recognize, anybody that follows politics will recognize a lot of the people on the screen here. And I'm going to show you in a second that you'll actually hear what they're saying, but I just wanted to show you how many of them signed up and are willing to take the script and read it into their social media accounts. And now what we've done is isolated just 3 of them, and you'll recognize the 3 of them, is to hear a little bit more and get an idea of what they were actually saying.
Immediately bring prices down starting on day one.
That ain't true. That's what you just heard. Since day one of Donald Trump's presidency, prices are not down, they're up. Inflation is getting worse.
So there we go. This is how the Democrats work. They send out their scripts to the people that I guess don't have thoughts for themselves, that they couldn't actually go on their accounts and say what they want to say about what they think about Donald Trump's doing, but they resort to a unified one voice as if that's effective. What do you think, Curt?
And plus, they all come off as though it's an off-the-cuff kind of freelancing kind of thing, and it's almost verbatim on the same script. Let me ask you, Curt, is this actually common? I mean, is it really, do both sides do this, or is this just something that the Democrats are doing that it's unique?
I think they do this a lot more than Republicans, and needless to say, third parties, which I don't think I don't think the Libertarian Party does this, but could be wrong. I would say I sort of I guess I talked about it with like the Democrats' Association of Power a second ago. I think it is this sort of interesting trade-off where like the Democrats on the one hand are seemingly more competent and disciplined. So like, something like, okay, here are the talking points. Here's what we're going to say, boom, 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 creeping barrage, this into, the ether. And, the Republicans might cower. And indeed, like there's a lot of history on that, especially in Trump's first term. I think what we have seen in recent years, though, is the sort of catch-22 of that kind of tradecraft, which is the Democrats increasingly are more close-minded and less likely to have it out on major issues. And I don't think this is a big secret. I think, tons of voices within the Democratic ranks have said that, free speech felt cloistered, that, independent thinking was discouraged, et cetera, et cetera. And, that there's the moral claim on that, which is to say that's bad. And I think good Americans should say that that's bad. Or good, constitutionalist Americans should say that's bad. But then there's the actual tactical winning elections and winning arguments thing. And I think it's actually infecting that as well. I think you see it throughout the Trump era versus the Republicans are this sort of insane fracas. But like, a party that has this enormous conspiracy at the top of it doesn't let Donald Trump become its nominee 3 times in a row, especially when, he was attacking all kinds of, orthodoxies about, within the party. I mean, this is a person, like him or dislike him, he's a bad guy, he's a good guy. This is a guy who rewrote the Republican parties, and I think he's on the way to rewriting the country's foreign policy, immigration, and trade policy like that. The Republicans in the Bush era were the free trade, de facto open borders, corporate right wing, and militarist party, and are in the process, hopefully, of reorienting completely in the other direction.
Well, it certainly looks like that, and definitely I'm hoping that this applies across the board. I've also been encouraged by some of the things that the president has been saying on China as well, especially in terms of national security issues. But I want to zero in on one of the issues you just said there in the concept that this, even electorally, might not be a winning play for the Democrats, but it's also sowing I think, unnecessary and unhealthy division at home. Now, I'm going to show you one here by Chuck Schumer, where he's talking about some of Trump's policies and what he wants to do to end this war. And the problem with this is it's inaccurate.
Let's not forget, America. Maybe there are some who say enough already. If we give in to Putin now, America will inevitably pay the price later. That's what history has shown. When you give in to thugs, when you give in to dictators, you pay the price. Hasn't Donald Trump and his allies learned the lessons of history? This struggle is in every way about the ultimate security of the American people.
I think maybe Trump has learned from history because Schumer's talking there like he thinks it's 1938, but Trump's like, hey, let's look at Vietnam. Let's look at the Afghanistan war. These things are stupid and they don't work out for us. And you see Schumer's talking there something about it's completely disconnected from reality because he doesn't talk about any of the bad things for Ukraine. By continuing to support this war, it's killing more Ukrainians and it's not changing the outcome, which Trump seems very focused on.
Yeah, I mean, look, I watched a little bit of the Elbridge Colby confirmation, the sort of deputy Pentagon person that's up for confirmation right now, and I think the sort of Wall Street Journal editorial board and sort of neoconservative organs and establishment Democrats have their knives out for the guy. And I saw some of the questions, especially from sort of liberal Democratic senators, and the obsessiveness on Russia is just remains striking. I mean, you would think that Ukraine was an American state. You would think that. Putin presides over an empire that is a peer economic competitor of the United States. You would think that if 15% of currently recognized Ukrainian territory is de facto ceded in the Russian Federation, that Putin is going to march into Berlin a la Joseph Stalin. I mean, it's just wildly out of context. And I think people always used to say that domestic politics don't impact foreign policy. I think that's absolutely bunk. I think what you're seeing with the Russia thing, and not exactly, a unique observation, but Putin, who is a talented gangster, has come to, represent all that a lot of Democratic base voters hate, which is that he's white, he's male, he wraps himself in the garb of Christianity, even though I don't think he's religious in the slightest. Frankly, he's basically confessed this. He's a militarist. That is what we want to go against versus look, it's not like the U.S. should just roll over for the Russians, but like the idea that the Russians have a spear is not exactly controversial in world history or even in recent American foreign policy. The idea that they're a top front burner foreign policy issue, you can only think that if you have a wildly out of context and activist view of what foreign policy should be in the United States.
Yeah. I want to go to one other here. This is on CNN. This is Mr. Vindman, who was very front and center on some Trump issues in the first administration. But guys like this keep being given a microphone and a prominent place at the table, and the things he's saying are even more disconnected from reality.
It is nonsense. It's completely historical. This is the second administration of a president that oversaw 4 years of war between Russia and Ukraine, didn't do anything about it. Now he thinks he has this idea to bring peace. And what does he do? He bends the knee. He appeases. His goal is to appease Putin. When what he should be doing is figuring out the fact that you're right. The Biden administration didn't do enough. But Russia's on the ropes. And the way you get peace is you get Putin to negotiate.
Okay, so the problem in the last... Oh, sorry, go ahead, Gary.
Oh, no, I was just saying, he's appeasing Putin? My gosh, isn't he just looking at what is in reality, what's available, and what's the next move? And he calls that appeasement?
And, and then even on top of that, the fact is, you see those themes playing in. There was the appeasing Putin thing. Then the problem with the Biden administration isn't that they gave support for Ukraine for as long as it takes, but they didn't give enough. They should have given more, and that could have changed the issue now. And then the last thing is we just can't keep going down the same path because we'll be next, et cetera. Those things keep coming up there. But the evidence on the ground is completely detached from that. It's very, very different. And again, Trump seems focused on the reality of it. So the question is, and you've touched on this a couple of times, but this seems to just be adding to it. If the Democrats keep pushing this line here, but it's not even factually accurate, then the people seem to be recognizing this as well. You pointed a second ago to the polls that show that there's a big gap between what Biden did and what Trump is doing on the same topics. It seems like they might want to rethink their strategy here.
Yeah, I mean, you try to stay pretty poker face, but I mean, you might have seen a smile come to my face when the Vindman person came on the screen. I mean, the guy is an insane fraud. And so is his brother, who the Richmond area constituents shamefully sent to Congress, this past election in another sort of collapse for the Old Dominion's interest as a political project. But I would say, like what they are arguing for, and again, I think people's backgrounds generally shouldn't be brought into it, but I think Vindman is a Ukrainian, or is he ethnically Ukrainian? I mean, they are trying to bring their new country, the United States, into the affairs of the country that their family left behind. I mean, this stuff is dishonest. It is dangerous. It is boring. It is enraging. The fact that these people are not called on it more is depressing for our public discourse. The Vindman brothers are not serious people. They should not be listened to. They should be disqualified based on their public utterances to the past. But it's a free country. It's a democracy. And if CNN wants to keep having them on, I guess they can have it. I just don't know who they're nourishing or educating beyond the absolute rote base of the Democratic Party that wants to proceed in this dangerous Russophilic direction that I think has only brought death and hasn't liberated Ukraine. Right? I mean, Ukraine is a war zone. Ukraine is going to have to be rebuilt, a la the Marshall Plan. Has this been good for Ukraine? I submit no. That you have a fanatical government in Kiev that is incapable of even, BSing its way through a press conference with Donald Trump in order to get the deal that was a fait accompli, apparently, for all reporting. This is who is in charge of billions and billions and billions of dollars of U.S. taxpayer money. And forget the money; they're in charge of our weapons. And they are in charge of killing in America's name. And this stuff is dangerous and should be put to an end immediately.
Amen.
Certainly agree with you on that one entirely. Uh, I want to look at a different aspect of the coverage here, as opposed to just the general the war intention, and that was also on CNN. I believe this was a couple of days ago. Alicia Johnson at a roundtable was talking about, they were kicking around what happened after the debacle in the Oval Office last Friday, and the view from the Democratic side is somewhat different than the Republican side.
A president of a country that has been invaded by a very strong aggressor in Russia, and to come to the United States that has for so many years been an unwavering ally to Ukraine, to be berated as if they were the ones that invaded Russia. And then all the Republican senators could talk about is what he wore. This man is literally trying to defend his nation against Russia. And what we understand about him defending Ukraine against Russia is also to make sure other European nations won't be invaded.
Yeah,
Wow, what an oversimplification, right? My gosh, to try and drill it down to that. And no wonder she was an advisor to the Harris campaign.
And you know, this brings up another issue, Curt, is that the version of reality being proposed here. If you just listen to this person talk, she seems very articulate. She seems very educated, speaks very well. And so you think, wow, that's right. I mean, he is. I mean, definitely Russia invaded Ukraine. There's no question about that. And he is just trying to defend his people. So, yeah, that's right. What Trump did, that was crazy. Ignoring the fact that, especially, and we did a diagnosis on this on the channel already about how you can see that it's definitely Zelenskyy that initiates all this stuff and then keeps it going and just will not shut up and then keeps antagonizing more and more. So he blew this thing up on the first hand. But even more fundamentally than that, yes, Zelenskyy was invaded for sure, but only after 2 times from 2015 to 2021, he rejected any diplomatic off-ramp. He rejected a number of diplomatic off-ramps in Istanbul in 2022, in the summer of 2023, again in the June of 2024, and then now Trump is trying to get him to end the war here. He keeps rejecting this at the cost of his people. None of that was conveyed to the CNN audience, so all they're left with is this here. Problem is, that may be a fine political narrative, but it doesn't comport to the truth, and it does result in Ukrainian people unnecessarily dying.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the question I would always ask is where does it end, right? So, like, I mean, if you see the initial Biden administration policy that existed in the spring of 2022, you may remember then President Biden's address in Poland, where at the end of the speech he said, "For the love of God, man, this man must go," or something to that effect. And then the White House had to do its kind of clever thing where it walks it back. So, like, I guess in retrospect, that was sort of contention that the president might have been losing a little bit. But it was U.S. policy in 2022, so 30 months ago. Was it a regime change policy? And I think it was a regime change policy in Moscow in all but name. And so that feels very not on offer. The Ukrainians aren't even able to eject the Russians out of their land. They've tried invasions in the course of Russia. They've tried drone striking Moscow to some success. It's not like the Ukrainians are chumps. Like, I mean, with U.S. backing and U.S. Military equipment, they have been able to do a lot of this stuff. But the war will never end on the Ukrainian side, I think, until they get a regime change in Moscow, which I think is, one, and I think unlikely. 2, not even clear that that's super preferable for the United States. I mean, I think we saw there was an attempted coup that whoever comes after Putin might be worse. So, like, if we're picking winners and losers and on the other side of the planet, I'm not sure we want to pick that winner or loser.
Yeah, I don't think we've ever really had a good track record on that anyway.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, Putin has come out of the sort of like rough mess of the collapse of the Soviet system, and as I mentioned, I think he's very canny and talented, and I don't think the Russian Federation, as currently organized, is the most ideal society on the planet, but it is one that is able to keep nuclear weapons out of the hands of terrorists. It is one that isn't a complete day in, day out threat to world order. If the U.S. leadership wants to represent its constituents' safety, which I think should be its first order, this is not the worst thing in the world. To flip it back, where does it end on the U.S. side? If the U.S. doesn't keep sending the Ukrainians weapons, and if the U.S. doesn't back the Ukrainians to the hilt, will this government collapse? a la the Kabul government vis-a-vis the Taliban. And if the answer to that is yes, and I'm not sure it is, but if the answer to that is yes, then it will never end. It will be this U.S.-backed protectorate, which is trying to, sabotage a nuclear power in Russia, and it will not stop until it achieves that or collapses of its own volition. Which, again, I'm not sure it will, but it is an extremely unstable project for the U.S. to be involved in. Basically, the battle lines have been roughly frozen for 18 months for all of our support. This is a stalemate. This is not insane. Again, even if you don't like Donald Trump, even don't like the way he's talking about the Ukrainians, and look, fair enough. This is far more reasonable than the approach by the Biden administration, which was this sort of chaotic. I guess we'll just keep sending checks and keep killing people and see what happens, folks. I think this is just a marked improvement.
Hey, Danny, you how would you categorize it? Would you categorize it as a stalemate on the battlefield?
When you look at the map on the national level,
right?
Like the whole map at one time, you haven't seen a whole lot of movement. But when you zero down into the front, especially on the eastern front, you have seen a fairly significant amount. I think it's like 4,400 square kilometers in 2024, which compared to the whole country is relatively small. But what is, I believe, the bigger factor is the loss of the Ukrainian lives, because Russia is primarily focused not on capturing territory, but on destroying the armed forces of Ukraine while building up their own. And that, I think, is the part of this equation that has been lost on most Americans, that the Russian has objective different than what the Americans would, because we would prioritize seizing terrain over seizing people, et cetera. And when they don't see that, then they think that Russians aren't winning. But the Ukraine side is running out of men. So at some point you could have a literal collapse of the front just out of sheer weight of the Russian side. And in fact, that leads right into the next clip that I want to show here, because I want to show you, this is Senator Van Hollen. And it's almost as important what he doesn't say here as what he does.
Look, what happened in the Oval Office the other day was reprehensible, right? Because we watched the president and the vice president bully President Zelenskyy, who has always said that he appreciates American support. I was part of that meeting that took place just before his meeting with the president, with other senators. And he, again, bent over backwards to talk about how grateful he was to the United States. So, look, if I'm President Zelenskyy right now, number one, I need to continue to solidify my support in Europe, because I will tell you, John, right now, Donald Trump, President Trump, does look like he's very much in Putin's camp.
See, what he doesn't talk about there is what the Democratic administration of Biden never talked about in all their 3 years. What is your objective in the war? How does this ever come to an end? How does all of this support lead to a positive outcome? They never talked about that, even less now. And for Hollen to say, well, okay, even though with almost nonstop support from the Biden administration and all of Europe, Ukraine utterly failed in an offensive in 2023 and has since that time been slowly moved back. Somehow, without the U.S., he should go to Europe, and that would somehow change everything that has happened before. It's irrational in the extreme, and yet he says it with a straight face.
Yeah, I mean, Van Hollen is not a dumb guy. He's a sophisticated individual, came up in Congress in Maryland, and he's been in the Senate for a while. He's definitely one of the gray beards of the upper chamber. But again, the Democrats are just wedged at this line that I think is cultivated for opposition to Donald Trump, and is, he's sort of explicitly trying to implicitly re-raise the Russiagate questions, which is does Trump work for Putin? Because that's the only reason why anyone wouldn't want to fight a nuclear war with Russia, because obviously paid by them. And so I think it's crass politics. And again, I think the Congress is a little bit different, because that probably works for Chris Van Hollen getting reelected in Maryland, which is like a D+25 state. But I don't think it works for the United States, and I don't think it works for the Democrats winning national elections.
Isn't the other problem that they're going to have to, they're forced to eating a humble pie, the Democrats? Anybody that has been a pro-Ukraine, pro support of Ukraine throughout this whole issue is that, my gosh, after all this time, after 3 years, we finally have to say, all right, maybe I was wrong. They don't want to do that.
No, but there's ways to pivot that are more
agreed.
this. So like, I mean, I think you've seen the Democrats be probably more quiet on the trans stuff than a lot of trans activists would prefer. I think you've seen the Democrats, probably be quiet on a lot of the COVID and sort of race BLM era stuff than a lot of their activist base would prefer. I think you've seen the Democrats be probably more quiet on the Israel-Palestine issue than, again, I think a lot of Democrats prefer, and also maybe some Republicans. But on this, this is just the bread and butter for what I think a lot of Democrats just believe. Like, I mean, people always assume there's just like this cynical play on all of this stuff, and a lot of times politics is cynical. But I've always been surprised, again, in my reporting, not surprised, but perhaps when you get in the room with a lot of these people, they actually do believe things. And so, like, I think that roughly your median Democratic senator, thinks that NATO is this sacred alliance, even though it's very much like a Cold War, almost Republican thing originally. And Trump asking any questions about the validity of this, where it ends, et cetera, et cetera. It's just him being a mean orange gangster who loves Putin. And like, again, like I'm simplifying a little bit, I'm parroting it a little bit, but I don't think it's terribly more sophisticated than that. And I think it animates a lot of their staffs and animates a lot of these politicians. And I think you saw it on display today with the Colby questioning. It's just insane and mind-numbing. And again, like, a lot of the congressional candidates aren't subjected to kind of rigorous examination of their policies that presidential candidates are. So like you've seen this enduringly in the Trump era. I mean, and even with Biden, who I think made the heroic decision to leave Afghanistan. Like, the presidents bring this to the American people. We should leave Afghanistan. We should end the Russia-Ukraine war. This is all stupid. The endless wars are bad, and I think they've been making that case basically consistently for 20 years since the Iraq scandal and fiasco. But I think at the congressional level, where people are paying a lot less attention, you still have this sort of autopilot, often older members of Congress that are obsessed with getting U.S. military spending to 5% GDP and fighting fighting till the streets of Tehran and Moscow.
Hey, you know what was refreshing? Seeing Lindsey Graham come out after the Oval Office rumble. He actually came out, and if you saw him at all, he was really quick to pivot away from Zelenskyy in a flash. You ever saw a more political move than that? And he finally admitted that, my gosh, this guy who I thought was my best ally, man, what a boneheaded thing he just did in there.
Yeah, if I were a sort of neoconservative pet project, and this was my House senator, I would want with friends like Lindsey Graham, who needs enemies. So
exactly.
It's funny that the Van Hollen there saying, if I were Zelenskyy, I would be working closer towards Europe, and obviously condemning what Trump had did. And yet, just a couple hours before we came on the show here just now, apparently Trump's actions are having some benefit, because Zelenskyy has sensed this time, after playing to the European side and seeing that they aren't going to give him unmitigated backstops. He's now saying, actually, how about this? How about I want peace, by the way. Nobody wants an endless war, which Trump has pounded on that he absolutely is not going to have an open, endless war. And then there toward the end, he said, and I actually do kind of regret what happened in Washington. But, I'm for this minerals deal. Let's go ahead and get it done. And I know, of course, I'm first thinking, dude, if you're willing to sign that now, why wouldn't you have signed it when you had the pen in your hand and the table sitting, in the next room over? And then why come do it now? Except that I think he sees Trump is serious about what he's doing. This comes, of course, after Trump has paused the supplies. So it's kind of looking like Trump is being successful here.
You wonder if he didn't stop the supply, if this would have come forward. I think did he call Zelensky's bluff?
I mean, I just don't think this was premeditated. I know that's the sort of Democratic line on this, that this was an ambush or a mugging. And again, you talked about the Democratic Party's ability to mesh discipline, and it's astonishing the way that they were able to message that over the weekend. Ambush, mugging, et cetera, et cetera. It's very redolent of other sort of terms that were sort of hammered as unquestionable over the last 5 years, whether it be COVID lockdowns, whether it be the official narrative on
Russia,
this,
Russia.
money. Yeah, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, et cetera, call it, equating the January 6th, sort of riot to Pearl Harbor, calling it 1/6 a la 9/11. All of those were like very quick and like not 45% of the country.
Insurrection.
Yeah, sort of do these things again. Like, not that like there wasn't a virus, not like that Russia didn't invade Ukraine, not like that the the former or the current president didn't inspire a hillbilly riot on the Capitol. Like, all of those things happened, but like scooping that out, heightening their significance, and transmuting into unquestionable mantra has been a skill of the Democrats. But I think it has to an extent clouded their ability to see reality in a lot of instances. And so, like, this is very clear. Zelensky sat down. Trump has this weird mercantilist view of the world. He wanted to get minerals out of Ukraine. I think it's nonsense, frankly, because I think good luck opening up a mine in a war zone. But like, again, the minerals deal is better than the status quo. So it's an improvement. And instead, when prodded, very mildly on something, he got into an enormous fight with a pretty ideological vice president. Had Trump intervene, and not only did Trump intervene, he intervened like out of pity. He was like, "What are you doing?" Like, he said, "You don't have the cards." I've never seen Trump. He's been alive for almost 80 years now. He's been on TV. He's been in our rooms, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I've never seen Trump actually take pity on a negotiating partner like he did there. That's how bad it was. And I think Zelensky is coming back to reality now. But like, it's just like, again, did that strike viewers as somebody who should be in charge of the lives of millions of people in a war zone, should be in charge of billions and billions and billion dollars of American taxpayer money? I'm sure, I have no doubt he's brave. I have no doubt that he's able enough. He's able to run a sort of, pretty dicey country. I'm sure he's talented, but his understanding of the U.S. domestic political situation and his understanding of reality, I think, is pretty warped.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty polite way to say it. Listen, now, really appreciate your views on all this, and thanks for coming on today. In the last few minutes we have here, I want to just take advantage of the opportunity I have here in looking ahead a little bit more. Historically, when a president wins and they have both chambers of the Congress with the Senate and the House, is that when it comes to the midterms, typically they lose one or both. That certainly happened to Trump the first go round. I wonder, with your prognosticator hat on, what is it looking like this early for the midterms?
I mean, I think it's very early. I don't think it's a total fait accompli that the Republicans will get rolled. I mean, people always assume the White House is going to get rolled, but like, Biden set the precedent in 22 of the Democratic Party doing pretty well as an incumbent in power. And I think the House margins have just been really, really, really tight for a number of years now. And I'm not super sure that's going to change. And then the Senate map has continually sort of favored Republicans for a while, and I don't believe the 26th map is all that different. It's just actually been a question of the Republicans' competence at winning those seats. If the Republicans were merely able to match their national numbers at the presidential levels, they would have a lot more Senate seats right now. Even in 24, the only senator in those swing states that matched Trump in terms of winning the statewide was McCormick in Pennsylvania. Rogers in Michigan lost, even though Trump won Michigan. Hovde in Wisconsin lost, even though Trump won Wisconsin. Kerry Lake lost again in Arizona, even though Trump won Arizona. And so, and then they've continually blown this, the Senate seats in Georgia forever. It feels like Georgia has Senate elections every year, even though Trump wins Georgia pretty easily. So, like, again, like, if they could just find candidates of a high caliber in the Trumpian mold, or the Trumpian policy mold, I think it's there for the taking. The reality, though, is not that the Trump wing doesn't have candidates who don't perform as well, but the sort of Mitch McConnell establishment Republican idea of great Senate candidate is not actually the kind of Senate candidate, in my view, that wins in the states that Trump's winning, right? Like, you're just getting a sort of Chamber of Commerce golf shirt wearing, cardboard cutout person to run in Wisconsin talking about taxes and taking out Iran. I don't think that's going to win in the way that, like, the Trump-Vance reindustrialization, bring America home, control our borders, common sense kind of thing does. But you know what? Powerful people in DC continue to have purchase and disagree with me.
Yeah.
Kurt, are you surprised to see how slow they've been to pivot away from their messaging from the Harris campaign? You know, leaving woke way far behind. Still have governors that are fighting for men to play in women's sports, that kind of thing. Some of the real cultural issues. Are you surprised that they're not, just running far away from that? Because it seems like some of them may be, but a lot of them are not pivoting away from that.
No, I'm not. I mean, I think it has been a subtle pivot, or just in terms of like de-emphasis. You're just not hearing nearly as much about it. But I'm not surprised. I mean, this is what actually a lot of Democrats believe in a lot of ways. The Republicans.
Yeah.
I mean, look, the Republicans have the pro-life issue, and I don't think that's a winner nationally, frankly. But it's not like the Republicans can just pivot from the pro-life movement because it's the base of the party. And I think that people who really believe in the hardline stuff and the LGBTQ stuff, I think it gets nuanced quickly. I think if you actually ask people whether or not parents should have no rights in the sort of trans decision-making process, and you live in a sort of monolithically powerful blue state like New York or California, that's fairly extreme. I think maybe to 70% of the electorate. It's extreme to like someone like Bill Maher, who I think is the sort of avatar of center-left, democratic thinking in America in a lot of ways. But they believe it is a sacred right, and I don't think it's necessarily going away. I just don't think it's nearly as hegemonically powerful as it was, say, 5 years ago.
Very good. Well, I appreciate that little bonus time we had there to get you. I hope to have you back real soon, but thanks for coming on today.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Great.
And we thank you guys for joining us too. Always appreciate you. Daniel Davis Deep Dive. Be sure and like and subscribe if you haven't on your way out. And we will look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.
Unintimidated and uncompromised.